candid conversations, unfiltered opinions, and humor with Abeg Vex Podcast.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another great episode of Abeg Vex. Today, I have the pleasure of having a young, beautiful lady that has now become a friend. I have Miss Tibisay Hernandez, the founder of the Curious Space, and mama to Aiden and Mia. So, hi, Tibi. How are you?
Hi, how are you? How are things going?
Things are going. Things be going. Life be lifing. What can I say?
Life be lifing. 100%.
We're here.
Nice.
So, TV, we're going to discuss something that you and I talked about, and it's something that is uncomfortable. However, it's a discussion that we have to have amongst ourselves, especially amongst the immigrant community here in America, and also immigrant women population here in America, within our own community of whatever country we come from. So buckle in, everybody. It's going to be a very interesting conversation. So Tibisay, you ready to have this conversation?
100%. Yes, let's do it.
Absolutely. So let's address it. Do you feel like there's a divide of sort, whether blatant or insidious, among, say, the immigrant population and, say, American, specifically Black American?
Absolutely. I think that there is a history that as immigrant populations, when we're coming into this country, we're standing on the backs and on the struggles and the wins of African Americans in the United States.
Yes.
That were, enslaved here and fought for their freedom. And, by proxy, we are all now benefiting from the freedoms that African American populations fought for in this country. And I think that we don't have those conversations enough.
Right.
And, as immigrant populations, we're coming from countries where that history was not taught. I mean, we're barely teaching that history here now.
Right.
The importance of that history now. So, coming in to this country, I feel like arrogantly, we think we're being given something by populations that are in power, by white populations that are in power in this country. We feel like, oh, well, they must have seen our values somehow. And that's why these immigration laws with our nations became possible. And it's like, that's not it. And the involvement of the United States in our countries, right? In our home countries, and the destabilizations of our governments that then caused our imminent immigration or our parents' imminent immigration into this country.
Right.
Those are things that are just not discussed. And, I feel like this election cycle with folks, especially the Latino community, people kind of being surprised by some of the outcomes. I definitely, being someone that's a part of the Latino community, Dominican descent, Afro-Latina identifying woman, I was like, yeah, y'all don't understand the complexities of the Latino community, the Latino immigrant population, and how we feel about what's happening in this country in terms of immigration, but also our lack of understanding of the history and what we are standing on and what we benefit from.
That was so beautifully said. So I want to hone it a little bit on what you said about not being surprised. What are kind of lived experiences that really result when you saw that exit poll of how the different demographic voted, right? Especially when we're talking about this election cycle and how you were not surprised. What specifically did not shock you? Even when other people are like, wow, okay, this is how y'all really feel, right? What did not shock you?
Immigrant populations that came here legally
Right.
are equally as upset about what they see as illegal immigration coming into this country. They do not understand refugee. They do not understand amnesty laws. Like people don't understand immigration as a whole and how people end up in this country. So they feed into this, oh, all of these people are illegal immigrants, right? So they don't see the nuance and they're looking through the lens of, well, if I did it and I was able to leave my country legally and get residency here in the US, why is it so hard for these populations to do it? Well, let's think about that. Let's think about when you were able to immigrate into this country, like immigration laws. There's ebbs and flows, how easy it is or how hard it becomes to immigrate to the United States. So that's the first thing. But the second thing is that there was this kind of thought process around the Latino community that everybody's illegal immigrants. So of course they should be empathizing with other illegal immigrants. So there's just so much embedded in that point of view of empathizing with a group just because we are Latinos. The big push is to see the immigrant population that's coming into this country, right? As Latinos, as under that umbrella. But that's so skewed and that's so nearsighted in a lot of ways because we're also all from different countries and different communities. And Latinos see themselves through the eyes of their national identity. Latino as a concept is something that you are thrust upon when you get here. People don't call themselves Latinos in their home countries. You don't hear Mexicans calling themselves Latinos, Dominicans calling them. No, they call themselves Dominicans. They call themselves Mexicans. So if you have a large, for example, Venezuelan population that's immigrating to this country, Dominicans aren't going to identify with that. Mexican people aren't going to identify with that necessarily, right? So there's just a lack of understanding and a lack of really doing the due diligence as a political party about what it means to be Latino to people, what folks in our community specifically are identifying with. And the reality is, people were identifying with the same narratives that everybody else was. The grocery bills going up, not being able to do the things that they were doing before, and then having a scapegoat. So now there's a scapegoat as to why it is that all of these things are happening, not thinking about the pandemic and how the pandemic affected the economy. People want somebody to blame. So these same tropes, they just keep happening to us.
Right. So, when it comes to identifying yourself based on your geographic area and, the Boricuas, Boricuas are the Puerto Ricans and, Dominicans, even within those groups, there's a lot of division, okay? And, I want to bring it back a little bit other than just this election cycle, because what happened during this election cycle is not only people who came here legally that are like, kind of like, oh, everybody else is coming illegally. The people who were here illegally and worked their way up, right, to the point of getting maybe a green card, permanent residency, or even a citizenship, right? And subsequently in those years, either they came with their family or they had children here, right? And, those children either benefited from DACA or birthright citizenship, right? Okay, great. So the conversation on just the grocery bill thing is old and tiring, right? The policies were the policies. But I think it was more than that. Okay, if we're to be
For sure.
honest, okay, it was more than that. It was more of a little bit on the hue side of things, right? Let's talk about that divide, okay? That divide that I have colleagues that openly say in their country, there's kind of like an uptown and downtown, south and north, right? Certain people, because of the complexion of their skin, are not even admitted into a club, right? Because of that. And that carries over, unfortunately, to our African American brothers and sisters who fight so diligently with little blood, sweat, and tears, right, to not only build this country, okay, but also to afford a lot of the civil rights that made immigration possible, okay? So what is that disconnect that happens that people who come here align with the mentality that oppresses the people or looks down on the people who fought for the right for you to get here, right?
Right.
Because it is about a responsibility, this conversation that we're having, talking about those things so people can be honest in calling things out, speaking up, or addressing things, right? Election aside, that's done. That there's nothing we can do about it. Final stage, here we come, right? So let's talk about that, because underneath all of that is this insidious
Yes.
disrespect of sort, insidious devaluing of sort that sometimes is very, not sometimes, all the time is really annoying. And all that it takes is education. You alluded to that earlier, right? So let's kind of like address that at that core, I wouldn't say root, but a core
Right.
aspect.
So I'll preface it and then I'll move into what you're talking about
Right.
with saying that I bring up the election and the Latino population and immigration because that in itself shows the implicit bias of groups thinking that your identification or that how they view you as a group, if they view you all as immigrants, how that's supposed to tie you together as a community, right? And that's not the case. So when we look at other fundamental issues that occur in this country, like the over-policing of Black bodies, and when we think about the division that exists within groups of color and why those things exist, it's white supremacist ideologies that basically seep into our communities and our culture. And we don't have the language, I feel like, because we don't really delve into as communities and we don't look at our own sins and our own issues, right? When we don't look at the nuances of where we come from in a real way,
Right.
then obviously we continue to perpetuate those same ideologies when we get to this country. So thinking that racism or that colorism specifically, right? Colorism affects our communities and affects us in our nations where we come from. We don't seem to want to tie the colorism and the experiences of colorism that happen when we are in our nations to that experience of racism in the United States. For whatever reason, we don't want to make that correlation because when we immigrate, we want to leave kind of those thought process. We want to leave those things behind and we want to characterize the immigrant experience as something that rises above racism because we are hardworking and we buy into these narratives that African American communities, even though they built this country, for whatever reason, are lazy and are part and parcel to their own demise within the societal structure that now we've immigrated into. And that is just so disturbing to me. It's so disturbing because let's keep it real. Let's keep it real about who we are, right? And how within our own families, yes, are we multiracial? Yes, absolutely. Is there anti-Blackness within our multiracial community? Absolutely. I mean, how can there not be when we have things like, you want to marry somebody that's lighter than you, right? To what?
Improve the race.
To improve the race, to better the race. Where do we think these things come from? Thin air? No, these are things that are embedded in our rhetoric. Why do you think we have so many different ways to categorize Blackness?
Yeah.
Right? It's because we're building a hierarchy towards whiteness, right? So I can't be Black. No, I'm café con leche. I'm coffee with milk. I'm caramel. Right? Come on now. Why do we have so many words? Because we are not trying to say Black. We're not trying to say it.
Right.
Because we understand what connotations come with saying Black. So I don't want to be Black. I want to be something a little bit better than Black. So I'm going to say that I'm café con leche. So we have to reckon.
I mean, run as you might from me, the cafe's still there though.
Girl.
I mean,
Right. But it's this caste system of color
Right. It is. That's what
that
it
we
is.
create, right? So if you're lighter skin, oh, don't go out to the sun too much. You don't want to get burnt. You don't want to get black.
Right.
Oh, your hair, is not as coarse. So make
Right.
sure you don't marry somebody that's going to have coarser hair than you, because then what are you going to do with that baby's hair? They're going to, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
God forbid that they are have more African features.
That's that term with good hair, bad hair, terminology. So the coarser the hair, the bad, the more in the bad scale.
Bad.
Yeah. The,
Right,
silkier, smoother the hair, that, you have good hair.
right.
Right.
The more European features, the more we celebrate. Oh, the baby was born with green eyes, hazel eyes, blue eyes. Wow. Right. And I remember when there was so much about Harry and Meghan Markle,
Right.
and they were talking about, I know that some people felt offended that, that they were offended that the skin color of their kids was being brought into question. And it was like, oh, we all do that. We all check behind the ears to see how dark the baby's going to be.
Who's we?
Where does that come from? And why are we accepting of that? And what does that make us feel? Right? So it's all of this. It's all the coded language that suggests to us that more African features and that darker features means a harder life and not as appealing of an aesthetic for a human body. Like, think about what we're saying, where psychologically all these things are stemming from. But we don't have those conversations. We want to believe that we are this multicultural society. But if you look throughout the world, darker populations are grossly underrepresented in governments. And when I say that to people who come from majority white places, they're like, what do you mean? Everybody in an African government is Black. It's like, yes, but you are working under the auspice that Black is all the same. The minute that you see brown, that means that there's representation there. And that's not true.
True.
So if you go to DR, yeah, you see when everybody in your government looks like your telenovelas, there is a reason we are recreating these systems, and we don't want to talk about it because we want to make racism a problem that's an American problem and that's a Black-white problem. And we get to right ourselves or excuse ourselves from complicity by calling ourselves Latinos or by calling ourselves immigrants or by calling ourselves an other.
So even with that within that concept, right? Even people who call themselves or identify themselves as Latinos, you still have a divide within that subgroup, not just based on country of origin, but based on alignment in a sense. There's some Latinos that are European presenting who heavily align with, oppressive policies, right? And the other Latinos who are more Afrocentric in their presentation, right? Who align with, the oppressive narrative as well, right? And who are they oppressing? The Black Americans who practically paved the way. And then you have the other subset of Latinos who are, some are European presenting, some are Afrocentric presenting, who are actually on the side of, hey, we're all in this together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So at any point, there's a mixture. You just never know who you are going to encounter, right? So you may encounter somebody who is darker than you, is in that, Latino categorization, that feels that, the light ways ahead of anybody who may be American, African American, right? Which is a very messed up mindset. So in saying that, with the use of people of color, which, a lot of times it gets stuck in my throat because of my own personal experience within these communities. Okay. I'm not just saying, today we're talking about the Latino community, as a group, because we didn't group ourselves into this. This is again classification that we didn't put ourselves into, but we're classified and here we are, right? Because we're just talking about this subgroup today. The use of people of color has become tiring. Okay, because the people that seemingly by description should fit into that subgroup want nothing to do with Black folks.
Right.
Right? So Black folks are like, no, I'm not a person of color because of the experiences that I've had, because of the treatment that I've had, right? Or because of the way I have, been portrayed by the subgroup of people of color term, right? So I am Black. I'm Black today, tomorrow, next tomorrow, until I die, right? Kind of, a mindset.
Yes.
So when you stand with that use of people of color, because I have a business that benefits us all at the same time, not everybody is going to want to benefit from me because of the way that I look, right? And in me presenting my business, sometimes it chokes me to say, you know what, this is a representation, this is advocacy for people of color. Because I know in some people's minds and ideology, because I'm of a darker skin hue, I'm not qualified to advocate, teach them, or support them in every shape, form, or fashion, right? So where do you sit with that use of, POCs, and what does that do for you?
I think that language has the ability to create connections and it has the ability to divide us. And I think why I bring things back and why I like the term anti-Blackness.
Right.
The reason why I like the term anti-Blackness is because it's very specific and encompasses racism, but it also encompasses colorism in a very real way. And what I do struggle with, and I'm not going to lie about this, is that being lighter person and considering myself Afro-Latina, I struggle with, am I taking the air or am I taking up space in spaces that I should be advocating or should be allowing for darker skinned people to take up this space, and I shouldn't be the one that's speaking up. And every time that I have this conversation, I'm brought back to the fact that we are all victims of white supremacist ideologies that put us into these hierarchies and into these divisive mindsets, right? Because ultimately, if your business is going to address anti-Blackness, that's going to fall on a lot of different people from a lot of different countries in a lot of different ways.
Right.
And I think that we need to accept that. But I understand what you're saying is that ultimately advocating for groups of people who won't advocate for you and and dehumanize you feels really, really just counterintuitive. But what I will say is that, being specific to me about who you're trying to raise up never is wrong. So when I hear more specificity around, no, I want Black people who don't benefit from specific systems to benefit from these systems. And that's my core mission, is to uplift the most vulnerable. That resonates more with me than just a general people of color.
Right.
So the specificity in terms of advocacy and equity, to me, is important, because when it becomes so broad, it becomes very muddied.
Right.
And ultimately, when we see systems that focus in on specific vulnerable communities, those systems can then be replicated and uplifted, and they always end up trickling to those who have privileges within the system anyway. And the example I always give is Black Panthers starting a free breakfast program in Chicago for Black children.
Right.
That has then transitioned into an American staple of free.
Not before they were persecuted.
No, not before the Black Panthers were persecuted. But my point is this:
it was adopted.
It always is. Anything that ends up benefiting a vulnerable community, the majority community is always adopted, and it ends up trickling into the majority. So why wouldn't we focus on who is being affected most? Why wouldn't our rhetoric be specific? And I think it's because what we push as narratives is a scarcity mentality, that because you're giving something to a specific community today, that you're taking something away from another community. And that's not the case. Your privileges are not being taken away.
No.
Your power is not being taken away. It's just not.
We don't care to take it away. How's that? we
don't have the power to take it away in the first place. Right? So when we have these conversations divorced from a conversation around power dynamics, we do a real disservice to our movements. And John C. Powell, who is the leader of the Othering and Belonging Institute out in California, he just does a beautiful job talking about universalism being about not and equity being about concentrating resources to vulnerable communities, but understanding that just because you give 75% to a community that needs 75%, that doesn't mean that you can't give 10% to a community that needs 10%, because 10% of its population is suffering. And then 5% to another community who's 5% of the population. It's this blanket, everybody gets everything, this equality thing that doesn't work. So for example, like during the pandemic, a ton of people got checks, right? And the people who didn't need it, what they do with them checks, girl? They renovated houses. There became a shortage in people seeking out sources for renovating their house because them checks, right? And for me, it's like, if I didn't need that check, I would have much rather that check go to the kids in the south end of Albany whose parents actually needed that check to survive on, instead of me in a middle-class neighborhood who was not struggling in the same ways that families that are deeper in poverty were struggling. But what do? It's easier to just say, cut up the check equally and send it out to everybody than to actually do the mechanisms and figure out the algorithms that divide resources up in an equitable way.
So even with that, though, I get what you're saying. There were also PPP loans, to businesses. There were corrupt contracts being awarded to people, right? So, bring the conversation to, equity versus equality. Society, the way society is set up, equality is a fantasy, right? Equity, on the other hand, is more attainable. How is equity attainable? Equity is attainable when you meet people at their different points of needs, right? You and I have needs. However, we may not have the same resources to meet our needs, right? So how about you give Tibi the amount of resources to meet her needs, and then you give me the amount of resources to meet my needs, right? Is not going to be equal, right? So you may have a house governess, a nanny, a housekeeper, a cook, a personal trainer, a nutritionist, a chauffeur, right? You may have all those things to your disposal. However, the one thing that you're lacking is a personal assistant, right? I may be all of those things to my family, and the one thing I'm still needing is a personal assistant, right? So does it mean that in order to meet all of my needs, that your needs, the resources that you have already is duplicated just so that? Because if I'm getting all those things, that means Sibi has to get all those things as well. Forget the fact that she already has them, right? So when people are talking about equity, that is what equitable society looks like. Meet people where they are, right? You can't use the same measurement for everybody, for every subgroup, for every gender, for every population, right? So that is why, when people say anti-Blackness, it doesn't matter how people use the term, or it doesn't matter how people use a term of supporting a marginalized community, somebody's always going to have a problem with it. Okay.
Yeah.
The same way that DEI now is an issue, right?
Yeah.
The same way that critical race theory became an issue. The
Absolutely.
same way that wokeness is now an issue, right? So it doesn't matter sometimes how you term something. That is why I think people have given up on the idea of, kind of like a kumbaya, okay, people of color thing, because a lot of people like, I'm not black, or, when a black issue happens, people that belong in that subgroup don't show up equally like black people will show up for them, right?
Right.
So I think that is the one thing with that word. We talked about a little about immigration and education. I want to have us kind of like delve a little deeper into that. We talked about this earlier, but granted, the American history is not taught in our individual countries, right? Because we have our own history. Okay, we have our own history. We have our own, functionality, our own government, all of that extra stuff. However, when a person migrates to another country, do you think, or do you have the strong belief that it is a person's responsibility to learn not only the history of the country, but also how things function? Because when it comes to, election again, people don't understand the different tiers of government, how it functions, what happens, who controls grocery prices. Since we're talking about groceries, right? Who controls that, right? So do you think immigrant population have the responsibility? Since you're over here now, it is your responsibility to educate yourself properly so that you are not kind of imposing an oppressive mindset and treatment to people who are not deserving of it.
So first of all, what oppressive systems thrive on is not creating accessible systems that give you the information.
Absolutely.
So the people here don't know how it works. So now you coming over and you're trying to assimilate into a system that don't want to teach its own people how this stuff works. And you're trying to figure out how to survive amidst people who don't want you here. And you're also trying to do your best on a day to day, right? And there's this reality about human beings are going to do what they need to in order to survive in the system. And if you are uprooting yourself to move from your country into this country, is because of your belief that there will be better opportunities. It is because of your survival in your country has already caused so much psychological, financial, educational, spiritual stress that you're trying to find a reprieve. So I do believe that it is the responsibility of our systems to create better transitional educational pathways so that we learn what the better interests are of our communities, but we don't really have organizations here put in place that facilitate that. And it's by design.
A little bit on that, okay? Going through the naturalization process, there's a little bit of that education. But that happens
Yes.
at,
You know who Thomas Jefferson is. We got you.
Right,
George
right.
Washington. Yes,
Right.
let's go.
So, my hang up, and I will always have this hang up, is that when you come to this country, nobody teaches you the value of a dollar.
Nope.
Okay. When you're out of survival, right? Also, when you come into this country, if you speak a different language, you do your very best to learn English in the most basic way where you can exchange greetings and whatever. Okay.
Another huge
at a
barrier.
point that you are able to participate in decision making, say your state, your local government, or the federal government. All right. The same way that you kind of put yourself forth to learn something, you can also learn something.
Sure.
The school is not going to teach you. Nobody was sent to your house to teach you the value of a dollar.
No.
Nobody was sent to your house to teach you how the American, say, corporate world works, right? You had to learn that hard way, or, it worked great for you, whatever. You had to learn that. I think it is an individual, I believe it is an individual responsibility, just so that you can be a better human being. Okay? So for you to not treat, like, if you hear, maybe it's just the way that I'm made up, right? You hear somebody's bad, 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 evil, evil, and it also comes from my experience as well. You take time to understand why are they saying this about you? Because you ain't do nothing to me. Everybody say you're lazy. However, like, don't you want better? Like, what happened? So if you seek out the knowledge, there are people there that are willing to teach you, right? There are people that are willing to share the history with you, have you understand things. So the one time that we talked about redlining, right? You shared a very personal experience about having to basically provide education about, what happens with heavily populated areas. Unless somebody seeks out that information, right? It's not on the billboards.
No.
Okay. It's not dropped off in your mailbox.
Right.
Okay. It's not going to be part of your employee training manual.
Right.
Right. So, as opposed to compounding the problem, as opposed to piling on to the people who set the stage for us to have the road to migrate from our individual countries here, I think we have that personal responsibility to try to,
Yes.
to
dig through the fray and understand.
Right.
And I agree with you. I just also believe that education is a multi-pronged process. I had a great teacher tell me that there are 3 things that you need to be a successful student, and all you need is 2 out of 3 in order to be successful. If you have all 3, there's no way that you can fail. The first thing is the will, the inner will to do it, right? So having the inner will. The second thing is the support systems, right? So having a great support system. And then the third thing is the educational actual facility, right? So if you are a student and you have the will and a great organizational facility that you're working with, maybe not having the support systems from those around you, you don't have that. But if you have a will and a great educational system, you can be successful, right? If you have the will and a great support system, but maybe the schools that you're in or maybe the organizations that you're in are not that great, you can still be successful, right? If you don't have the will, but you have a great organization that you're in and you have a powerful support system, then you can be successful. The will can come, right? It can be drawn out of you. So I think that what we do is that we look at these structures and say and blame one thing, when in reality, we need to have multiple entry points into success. And there has to be more than just one thing. Because if you only have the will, but no support, no organization, it's going to be hard. It's not impossible. It's going to be a lot harder. If you only have the support system, but you don't have the will and you don't have the access to the organization, it's not that it's going to be impossible. It's going to be a lot harder. If you're only in an organization that's great, but you don't have the willpower and nobody is helping you at home, nobody is supporting you, it's going to be hard. So having only one of those things is not enough. There has to be multi-pronged approaches to this. And when we look at the hierarchy of needs, right, when you're studying psychology, what frustrates me is that when you were talking about resources, I just don't understand why everyone in this country isn't housed, doesn't have access to food, doesn't have access to basic needs. And I think that for me, starting there, like, how can we just give people access to basic needs? And then whatever their willpower is, or whatever we want to say, extra that's on top of basic needs that they want, if you want to claim that to be meritocracy, if you want to say, hey, you can go above this if you do this, this, and this. Okay, I got you. But we are a rich enough country where people should be housed, where people should have food, where people should have basic needs. And the fact that people's basic needs are not even being met, that healthcare, I mean, look at what is in the news cycle now, right? The greed and people's lives not being taken into account by insurance companies, and then the tragedies that end up happening because of that, right? I feel like if we focus on creating these basic people at least having access to the basic needs, then everything else being an add-on that people fight for, okay.
So, the system is set up to, again, keep certain people at a point being dependent, right? It's kind of like that flea experiment where fleas that were jumping way high were collected into a jar, closed. And then the fleas within that jar procreated, and, the babies, were used to jumping that distance. Even when that jar was open, the fleas that could jump high were so conditioned that they could only jump the length of that jar, right? And subsequently, the babies that were born into that jar, only knowing that distance, kept only jumping that distance, right?
Right.
Okay. So that is basically a society that creates a situation where people are dependent, and it takes a strong will. Okay, going back to that three-prong approach, it takes a strong will for somebody who, quote unquote, grew up in the ghetto to want to get out. And in wanting to get out, they have to have somebody who believes in them.
Yes.
And that person is usually not an organization or a structure, because the structure is what caused this in the first place. So just to challenge that idea of education a little bit, okay? The structure is not going to be there to support you as a structure which is organized. The structure can be at a very nucleus stage as a family.
Yes.
Friends.
And that's why I say that those three things,
right,
having two out of the three. So if you have the willpower, but I'll think about, you're first generation and you're going to Harvard. It's an institution where now you are going to be exposed to other ways of thinking, other networks. Your family, may be in the ghetto. They don't know what those environments look like, and they can't support you in that journey.
Right.
But now you and your willpower are in this organization. So it's not just education, but I use education because that's always my reference point.
Right.
But it's having access to rooms where it happens.
Understood. And I think that is what people are tired of, because the access to the rooms where it happens are starting to reflect the oppressive mindset. Okay. Let's talk, for instance, what happened with this thing that was overturned recently, affirmative action, right? Okay.
Yes.
Let's talk about that. So most of the students who got to Ivy League University got there on their merit, no matter their backgrounds, okay?
Right.
Because majority of the admissions into Ivy Leagues are legacy students. Because if I graduated from Harvard, okay, my children will have to graduate from Harvard, because you know what? I am an alumni. Do you understand? Right. All right.
Yeah.
So as opposed to legacy, okay, even in the city of New York, when we talk about gifted and talented programs, right? Mm-hmm. So who are the students that get into gifted and talented? Children that already have siblings in gifted and talented school, despite their score, okay? However, that first child getting in will have to pave the way for the rest of them. Right? Yeah. Okay. So affirmative action, in a sense, opened the door for those children who grew up, say, in the ghetto, but they're brilliant. Mm-hmm. And the teacher recognized their brilliance and said, you know what, you can make something of your life. I'll help you study, recommend you for AP classes. That did not start out with the organization. right? That started
Right.
out with one person. Okay, it could have been a mother that advocated for their child. My child is brilliant. Is there any way they could skip a grade? Is there any way anybody can support them? What other
Yes.
program is there for my child? Okay, so the reason why I keep bringing it back to this responsibility is that things happen within our family system at the very nucleus,
For
right?
sure.
Where a lot of these behaviors either are perpetuated or statements are made because of either lack of knowledge, okay,
Hmm.
or just perpetuating whatever stereotype that may be rooted in bigotry, right?
Yes.
Going back to the three prong, it is our responsibility, okay, if you've been exposed enough, if you've read enough, okay, now that in the institutions are banning books, but good for you if you got
Hmm.
to those books before they got banned. Okay, if you've been exposed enough to see things for what it is your responsibility to be the institution. Right. You don't wait for an established institution to come and teach a family member, cousin and auntie, whoever, right? It should be your responsibility to say, you know what, you really shouldn't be thinking that way. Did you know that? Da, 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 da? Did you know that this happened? Did you know that this and
Right.
this and this and this happened? Do you know that this has been ingrained and has been generational? Okay. Do you know that people are actively working to change the situation? However, these laws that are put in place are kind of restrictive. It is our responsibility to educate our family members, our friends, because some people cannot be saved, please, everybody. Some
Right.
people cannot be saved. However, if somebody is interested in learning and understanding that a lot of this, like some statements that they make, comes from a place of bias or a place of misinformation. If
Hmm.
you offer to educate them and they're willing to be educated, fine. However, if they don't want to be educated and they don't want to know because you know what, the bigotry feels good in their chest, if you continue to hang out with them, that's a you problem, really. So, as opposed to expecting established organization or structure, we should be that one person that supports. We should be that institution that
Right.
educates, right? And if we see the willingness, that will in somebody to do better or learn more, like if somebody makes a statement and you correct them, it's like, oh, well, how did you know that? Where did that come from? And you continue. That's a will to ask, right? To continue.
It's still an organization. And I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you why. Because affirmative action is a systemic organizational tool that was used to crack open doors
Right.
into places where discrimination was not allowing folks to enter into. Now, it created the Black middle class
Right.
in this country, and now it's overturned, and we're seeing the data showing that yes, the majority of people that were going into these places were legacy, but we're seeing a dip and a drop with affirmative action being taken away from admissions in our Black and Brown communities. And Black and Brown communities were actually at the precipice of getting up there in terms of being educated. We're seeing growing numbers in Black and Brown communities being educated through a lot of these systems that were created, that were busted open through the civil rights movement, right? What you are talking about, those systems that where someone takes interest in you, communities of color were building organizations that were then educating those kids that had potential, those individuals that wanted to be educated, and setting them up as leaders. So when I'm talking about a system, right, I'm talking about things that are created as conduits for success by a community. When I'm talking about support, I'm talking about support from individuals that are outside of yourself. So when you're looking at the three prongs that I'm suggesting you, I'm suggesting individuals that are outside of you, and then I am suggesting organizations that are created to support your development. So libraries, right? Libraries are created by a community, and these are organizations that support students that who may not have access to the ritzy big organization, but it's a conduit. So that's what I'm saying in terms of the framework. It's not just Harvard. I use that as an example, but it's not just that.
Right.
It's anything. It's your church that's created. It's your mom's book club that's created that then gives you access to someone that recognizes something in you that maybe a parent or someone in your household did not recognize in you. So those three things existing is what has uplifted communities out of poverty, is what has created, access. And once you build this society of folks that really want to change their situations, now we got to parse that into laws, which is what happened with affirmative action, that disallows the oppressive systems to come and crush these communities and these organizations that are cultivating success.
All right. So on the immigrant side of things, right, what should an immigrant who comes to the United States of America understand in ways of educating themselves about, as opposed to either voluntary or involuntarily adding to the oppressive narrative of our African American brothers and sisters? What do you think us as immigrants, okay, should do within our own community, right, to stop this bigoted narrative that comes out in different form, like you so eloquently stated at the beginning of this conversation? Should we police, in a sense? I don't like the word. Should we be should we be the voice of reason within our own community, including families, right, to correct things? Or should we just let things, that is how Theo is, that's how Tia is, that's why uncle is, auntie, cousin,
No, we should not let the Theos and the Theas, and that's just how they is narrative continue and progress. I think that, one thing that I'm always astounded by, Indian communities, like South Asian communities that come to this country, like, you will see that they have transitional programs and communities that they will build for when a family is coming into the United States, that will talk to them about the language, will talk to them about the neighborhood that they're in, that will literally shelter them into whatever neighborhood or whatever system it is that the family is transitioning into. I would love to see more Latino communities have transitional systems, and immigrant communities have those kinds of transitional systems that we create for ourselves, that help us, that give us the narratives, the historical narratives of this country from an unfiltered way, in understanding of what it is that we're standing on, the laws and the legalities and the history that we are benefiting from when we are immigrating into this country, and also giving us resources. So I think that we need to think about innovative ways and maybe utilize some of those strategies that other communities use when we are seeing them immigrate into these countries, into our country, into the United States. So I would really love to see a larger development of community organization for immigration education, in understanding the dynamics of this country, not just how to pay your taxes, or, how to find a job, or where to go to groceries, but utilizing our people, and then partnering with African American communities, partnering with African American communities, so that we are delivering this information from individuals who are here fighting, who are the pillars of those communities,
have a generational history of doing this,
who have an understanding.
Yes.
Yes. So I think that would be a great space for the nonprofit world, to think through, and even spiritual and religious.
Yes.
Because a lot of Latinos come into, spiritual communities here. Like, how are spiritual communities partnering with African American communities to help our immigrant populations, and to help our populations that are here now and still don't know about the history of this country, the building of this country, the realities about the inequities that you may experience in this country, but then also, how are we, with our presence here, able to be a positive allies and advocates
Absolutely.
for those that came before us. So I think it's about rethinking the systems that exist and creating meaningful partnerships. And, we kind of, I keep going back into history, but we kind of saw the beginning of that start with the rainbow coalitions that were being built, right? I think that rural white communities also need to be invited into this conversation as well, believe it or not, because I think that socioeconomic coalition building
Right.
is also extremely powerful when you are trying to create collectives that are building resistance to greed and power and status quo.
Absolutely love that. So it's all about community. And I am a firm believer that there's more that unites us than divides us.
100%.
And when you talked about a lot of these things that unfortunately separation and oppression that are perpetuated by the immigrant communities towards African Americans brothers and sisters are things that these communities experienced in their own home country. And, we can draw a direct correlation to the slavery that, affected everybody and the colonization as well. Okay. So that is a root cause, right? It is what it
And
is.
imperialism that's still happening.
Exactly. Right. So it doesn't make sense that there's infighting or, of sort or kind of like oppressive behavior towards one another because we can't turn our swords inside. There's
Right.
more that really unites us than divides us. Even look at our foods, right? Plátano is across the,
Let's go. I mean, I'm Dominican. They literally call us plátanos. So you don't got to talk to me about plátanos. That's my favorite food. I can eat plátanos for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, honey. Okay?
In every form, in shape or form, we can make it into anything.
In every
right?
shape, form, ripe,
Right.
green, boiled, fried, broiled, girl, mashed,
All of it.
not any way that you can make a plantain, I will be at that table.
Exactly.
I will eat it.
I love it. I really want us to get to a place, and that was a great suggestion, be it a nonprofit or a collaboration. And I really love these podcast segments that I have with very great thinking people like yourself. It brings these hard conversations to the surface, and it helps us really come to a solution. Yes, the problem is there. Yes, we identify it. However, what should we do? How are we going to go about solving it? So I'm very glad we were able to have this conversation. It is just the surface of the conversation, y'all. So TV and I have been talking. There's plenty that we're going to talk about. So please get involved with this conversation. Let us know what you think. Is there anything that either of us said that resonated with you? Is there anything that you would like to follow up on? Do you want to join this conversation? Because we can get great minds together and kind of like really work towards getting to that solution, whatever it may look like, right? The time to pull together is now. The time to understand each other is now. And in recent years, we've lost the ability to be able to have a dialogue. We can have a dialogue respectfully. We don't have to agree with each other's every point. However, you can see where I'm coming from. She can see where I'm coming from, and we'll just move on. All right. This was a great conversation, Tibisay. And is there anything that you want to leave the audience with?
My company is called A Curious Space because I believe in creating spaces just like this, where we're asking each other questions, where we are open about our agreements, our points of disagreements, our points of community, all of those things. And I think that what's going to get us out of a place of oppression is ultimately community and innovation.
Yeah.
It's thinking about different ways to build coalitions. I really, really believe in coalition building. And coalition building starts with asking questions and being open to answers that we don't understand or maybe that we don't like.
Right.
But still sticking through to into the conversation until the end, where something new and beautiful gets to be built.
Yes.
So I believe in the human spirit. I don't think I would be here. I don't think, my ancestors could be looking down on me with everything that I am privileged and I'm so grateful that I have been able to accomplish. I live my life every day knowing that somebody fought and died for me to be at this point. So I'm grateful. And I think we just need to walk into spaces with a lot of gratitude, but with a lot of humility and asking and being open to ask questions. I think that that's the biggest thing. So if you're interested in that curious space, you can go to a-curious-space.com. I'm also on LinkedIn. So please reach out to me and let's build a better world together.
Absolutely.
I believe that we can.
Absolutely, I agree. And for anybody who will be looking for Tibisay, we're going to include all of her business, everything that encompasses this wonderful, beautiful woman. We are going to include it in the show notes so you can find her wherever she is. She is everywhere and doing great things, I may add. So whoever needs to reach out to her, reach out. We're going to include all her information in the show notes so you can reach out to her. She is as genuine as they come. This is her. Again, we are going to have this conversation more and, surrounding different things. And it's great to connect with you. And thank you for being here. So thanks everybody for listening to us and let us know what you think. All right. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to Abeg Vex Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. It really helps us out. We'd love to hear your thoughts and continue the discussion. So join us on social media or drop us a message. Until next time, keep exploring, stay curious, and keep pushing the boundaries of your world.